I've always been drawn to systems that make sense. As a kid, computers felt like a revelation. Not just because they drew cool pictures like this back in the 70s, but they were fascinating because you could make a mistake and it would give you an error message and you would fix it and then it would do exactly what it told you. That was really cool. It was really predictable, unlike most of the people I've met. Ask my wife. It turns out there's a word for that. In my case, it's autism. And I didn't know it in the 70s, but I know about that now. In fact, I don't think anybody called it autism in the 70s or the 80s, at least not what I have. That mix of systems thinking and a brain that insists on clarity turned out to be both my superpower and my biggest friction point. Today, I want to show you what that taught me. First, how our systems misread signal. Second, how to reframe what we call neurodiversity. And finally, what it looks like when we design teams for clarity instead of noise. Let's start with the misread. That was the moment when neurodivergence met systems thinking. I needed the world to be legible, and it rarely was. For years, I built a career in tech, focused, creative, productive, but underneath, it was a constant translation layer, guessing at expectations, masking confusion, trying to read systems that had no idea how to read me. Eventually, I hit a wall, not of capability, but of culture. I realized the problem wasn't me, it was the system. And that's where our story really begins. Very often, the system keeps misreading signal, not because of any cruelty or any viciousness. The system is tuned for the wrong metrics. Most evaluation systems reward confidence, not contribution. We built our culture to read volume as a signal. Loud equals certain. Certain equals competent. But that shortcut costs clarity and sometimes a lot of money. So a friend of mine, a quiet, literal guy, systems thinker, engineer who tests everything, solved a problem that saved the company $1 million a year in the fall. And then springtime came bonuses. And so it solved the problem, A/B tested the thing, and it proved that it was saving. And then bonus time came, and the bonus was down. And the boss said, I need that kind of delivery every month. Okay. So a few months later, he was on a PIP, performance improvement plan, if you haven't had the luxury. This wasn't a villainous boss. This really was not a villainous boss. This was just a measurement system that was calibrated to vibe instead of value. The fix, the code, the change was measured, but the recognition wasn't. That's what happens when quiet signals fall below the system's threshold. Here's a story I've heard a couple of times now. The manager stumbled across a new Jira metric on the Jira dashboard, and oh my gosh, something was buried in that page, and they noticed their engineer was an outlier. Whew! Suddenly that number mattered more than the months of uptime or the years of mentoring that engineer had baked into that team. That one number. The metric became truth, context disappeared, and after a few months, so did those jobs. Interviews run on the same bias. We treat them like short plays, eye contact, pacing, improv confidence. Team fit turns into a comfort test for whose vibe we're more in tune with, whose noise we prefer. The person who quietly stabilizes a release pipeline rarely wins that audition. And every time we mistake performance for signal, we burn trust. The real cost isn't the missed promotion, it's the feedback loop that never closes. When the system rewards presentation over precision, it starts manufacturing static. If our systems keep misreading signal, we lose the very clarity that we built them to produce. Maybe that's the bigger lesson here. The outliers we call neurodivergent aren't glitches in the matrix. They're diagnostics. They show us where information is leaking, where the signal path is distorted. So what happens if we treat those anomalies as data? That's where we're headed next, into what those patterns tell us about how to redesign the system itself. Right now, most companies treat neurodiversity as an HR category, a checkbox, a form you fill out, or a webinar that you go to once a year, or something lame like that. But what it really is system data. It's a direct look at how stable or unstable team design actually is. We don't have a talent shortage, we have a fit shortage. There's no lack of intelligence or creativity or drive. What's missing is the environment where those traits can operate at their natural tempo. Let me give you a metaphor. That's my kids. At the Exploratorium in San Francisco, and this happens to be the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, they have this big old turntable inside a wooden box that's got, this little border around it. And you got these discs, wooden, rubber, what have you, that you can put on the turntable. And if you just put one on there, it'll shoot right off because that thing's spinning pretty fast. But if you take the moment to balance it and get it spinning at the same speed as the turntable, it'll just stay right there. That is what we're trying to do with our teams. You can balance a bunch of these and have several of them spinning all at the same time, and they might orbit around or they might kind of stay in one place. But if you get sloppy with one of them, it goes shoo and knocks them all out. This is what happens with our teams. The Exploratorium calls this one of their hardest exhibits to learn and also one of the most addictive, because once you see the pattern, you start anticipating the wobble before it happens. And then you start setting up a whole bunch of them to spin together. And this is exactly what we do with our teams. Each person has a different weight, a different tempo, a different cognitive spin rate. Some need fast cycles and tight feedback loops. Others need longer arcs to produce depth. The goal isn't uniform speed. It's mutual stability. In that metaphor, neurodivergent traits aren't noise. They're sensors telling you when the system's oscillating out of range. You don't fix the disk, you tune the system. Support when the orbit gets shaky, release when it stabilizes. Think about how that changes what inclusion means. Instead of accommodations that single someone out, you start engineering for stability. You adjust pacing, communication mode, signal clarity. You build feedback paths that can absorb variability rather than rejecting it. A team that designs for signal stability doesn't just help the autistic engineer or the ADHD project manager. It helps everyone who's ever hit overload. Anyone? Yeah. That's the universal design principle we keep forgetting. The same ramps that make a building accessible also make it easier to move heavy equipment. So the real question isn't how do we include neurodivergent people, it's what are they already teaching us about how the system should be built? When you start reading those patterns as data, you discover where your process generates friction, where meetings spin too fast, where documentation collapses under load. You can finally see the invisible forces that wear people down. That's the shift. From identity management to signal engineering, inclusion becomes less about who gets special treatment and more about how we stabilize the whole system. What does it look like when we design teams the way we design good systems? When we design for clarity and not conformity? When we treat inclusion as a design constraint, not a courtesy, the noise drops for everyone. Think of it like signal infrastructure. We're not adding HR polish, we're tuning the circuit. Clarity isn't soft. Clarity is throughput. The loudest voice, we're going to talk about 4 different parts of this. This is the first one. The loudest voice isn't always the best signal. If you shift part of the conversation to asynchronous, shared docs, written inputs, you capture ideas that never would make it into a talking meeting. You get persistence instead of performance. And you stop rewarding only those who think fastest on their feet, which usually means whoever had the most coffee, but acknowledge contributors who take time to consider details others might overlook. Second, evaluation. Effort doesn't always equal impact. Burnout can look like drive until it doesn't. When we measure outcomes in uptime instead of face time, we suddenly see who's stabilizing the system, not just who's narrating their work the loudest. Impact beats impression. Third, we have feedback. The classic feedback sandwich, compliment, critique, and then compliment, is designed for comfort, not accuracy. It muffles the truth. Say what you see and ask what support would help fix it. That's candor with collaboration, and it turns feedback from judgment into design data. It respects the human. And fourth, crisis loops. The world's on fire. My desk's on fire. My desk's always on fire. Crisis loops are just system noise that never got debugged. Build pacing plans into the workflow. Time for cool down, catch up, actual recovery. In engineering terms, that's capacity management, not indulgence. And it has to be safe to take a break. These 4 together, they're not accommodations. Oh, this is the one you want a picture of if you want a picture. These aren't accommodations, they're optimizations. Every time you calibrate for cognition, the system reads more of its own data and makes better decisions. What all these have in common is structure that listens. The same architecture that protects your uptime also protects your people. When inclusion is baked into the design, the signal becomes legible, trust becomes measurable, and performance becomes sustainable. Clarity isn't etiquette. It's engineering for cognition. And that brings us full circle. Because the systems we build mirror what we believe about people. If we believe they need supervision, then we design dashboards. If we believe they want to do good work, then we design feedback and trust. Confidence without competence breeds anxiety, so we build control instead of clarity. That's how we end up trusting numbers more than judgment. Trust dissolves into metrics. If we think people are interchangeable, we build for noise. If we think they're unique, we build for signal. Inclusion is calibration, a truthful system, not just a comfortable one. Inclusion isn't charity, it's engineering. Diversity gives a team redundancy, adaptability, and truth-checking. Teams that learn to hear quiet signals don't just perform, they endure. Respect, curiosity, and structure add up to give responsible clarity. When you walk into your next meeting, listen for the quietest voice. It might be carrying the cleanest signal you'll ever hear.